Good evening and welcome to this one of the series of Alumni Hours. My name is Fabienne Mackay. I head the School of Biomedical Sciences for the University of Melbourne. First, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And I also would like to extend the respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Australians who are joining us tonight. So it's fabulous to see so many of you coming tonight, students and alumni, so again, welcome. And also we're going to welcome tonight two very special guests, Dr. Bronwyn King, AO, and Angela Lavoie-Pierre, which I pronounce with an impeccable French accent. So let me tell you a few things about the School of Biomedical Sciences. So we're actually celebrating this year the 5th anniversary of the school. That doesn't mean that the University of Melbourne has not been teaching and researching biomedical science before that. In fact, it's been doing that for nearly 160 years. But it's only in 2015 that a school dedicated to biomedical science was created. And I had the good fortune of being appointed as the inaugural head for this school, and it's been a great pleasure leading that school up until now. So just give you a little bit of data about the school. So since it's been created, we've been one of the university's largest and fastest growing school with more than 500 staff, over 2,500 full-time students enrolled each year. We're also situated, as you probably have noticed, in this largest biomedical precinct in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's very important because it means that all our students and researchers can really have access to world-class facilities and really generate and start wonderful collaborations and very impactful collaborations. So we have 5 departments, and in those departments there's about 85 research groups. And each year we publish more than 1,350 papers in average. So at the end of 2019, we can now count, so as a head of school I can count 5,780 graduates of the School of Biomedical Science. Now the good news here is that we've been able to stay in contact with 90% of you, and that's fantastic. It's fantastic because it's giving us a lot of data, and I can share that data with you. So what we know about you is about 2/3 of you are going to undertake postgraduate medicine after you've finished the degree of biomedical science with us, or biomedicine. But we're always wondering about the last third. What's happening to the students who are not pursuing medicine? What are they going to do? What kind of profession they have? And it's been fantastic to discover that a lot of our students don't do medicine, do actually undertake a fantastic career. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So Cindy Tran, for instance, she completed a Bachelor of Biomedicine in 2014. And she went on to study a Master of Public Health, and in her role as a consultant at an Australian healthcare associate, she's now developing policies about food security and food system in local councils. So it's a really interesting career that she's undertook and decided to embrace. Phoebe Ling, she graduated in biomedicine in 2012, and since she's established herself as a senior consultant at Cerner Corporation. So if you don't know what Cerner Corporation is, it's a company that actually puts in place electronic health records, which is becoming very, very important in managing patients across the world, not just in Australia. And finally, Tal Malman, he completed his Bachelor of Medicine with us, and he completed his Doctor of Law, Juris Law last year, and now he's a graduate, and he's applying his understanding of biomedicine to specialize in intellectual property rights of medical discovery. So again, using the law and his knowledge in biomedicine to develop new treatment, new medical devices that are going to advance health in a different way. So what I wanted to tell you is basically when you do biomedicine with us, and all our students who are going through the degree with us are really equipped to do anything they want. which was for us a really good message that we got from staying in touch with you. And if you had any doubt, I'm a biomedical graduate myself. And early this afternoon, we had a wonderful welcome ceremony for our new students. And I was walking back, and I was about to cross Swanson Street, and I got stopped by a road worker, and we're starting to have a chat. And he said to me, "Are you a lawyer?" And I said, "No, I'm a biomedical." But it dawned on me, I said, not only we know that as biomedical graduate we can do anything we want, but it seems the rest of the world thinks we can too, which is really good. Now, moving on, I'm going to introduce our guest in a moment, but I want to talk about Alumni Hour, which is a series of events like this one. And there's going to be many throughout the years where our alumni and students can hear from and meet the faculty's most interesting and inspiring alumni. People like you who are motivated to make a difference in the world and in the communities they strive to help and serve. And that's very much what we're going to hear tonight. And now here it comes to introduce our guest tonight. So Angela Lavoie-Pierre, again, with a purchase. So just to say a few words about Angela, she's the host of a popular daily ABC News podcast, Signal, and has been reported at the ABC Sydney newsroom since 2008. And also in that time, she also presented Triple J News, AM/PM, The World Today, The Country Hour, and Triple J's Hack program. And I want to introduce now Dr. Bronwyn King, our guest of honor. So Dr. King is actually a graduate of our university, and she received a medical degree in 1999. I think she's been a graduate since 20 years. You look so young for 20 years. And as you will see, she's specialized in oncology, and I say that because it's going to be very important in the story, but I don't want to say too much about the story because you'll see you're going to be inspired in a minute. And so her career has included roles such as social entrepreneur, movement maker, medical specialist, global renowned for imitating. I'm not going to say anything. You know why I want to say anything? I'm going to say something different. So what I'm going to say is she's a remarkable woman. You're going to find out in a minute, and I'll leave the suspense and the mystery a little bit. But all I'll say is Bronwyn's life is the embodiment of courage, boldness, and undeterred determination to change the world. And through that energy that she's dedicated to that quest, she achieved remarkable results. And for those results, she's been awarded an Order of Australia in 2019 for service to community health, and she was named 2019 Melbourneian of the Year. So be ready to be inspired, and please welcome both Angela and Bronwyn to the stage. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Great to be here.
Great to be here. I feel very lucky to be sitting here speaking with you, and I have far too many questions. We're not going to get through them all, but I think a good place to start perhaps is, I suppose, why you chose not just to come here to the University of Melbourne, but why you chose medicine at all.
It's a great question. When I was 14 years old, I was a competitive swimmer. Mm-hmm. And so if at 14 you had have said to me, look, what do you do? I think most 14-year-olds would probably say, look, I'm in year 9 or I'm in year 10. But I would have said I'm a swimmer. Mm. So I was really very focused on swimming, and I had dreams of being I wanted to be a great swimmer, a champion swimmer. And part of that was hard training. And so I was at the gym at the Nuttawading Swimming Club, my swimming club, one day, mm-hmm. and they had a picture that I'm sure many of you have probably seen, which is a picture of the human body with all the muscles on the front and all the muscles on the back of the body. And it was the first time I had seen that picture, and I was just totally mesmerised by it. And I thought, now hang on, which muscle do I need to make stronger to swim a bit faster? And it was back in the days of photocopying. So I got a photocopy of this poster, and I took it home and I started memorising all the names of all the muscles. I was a big nerd.
How long did it take you?
I don't even know if I've ever totally finished that off so well, but I just loved it. I just was totally fascinated with the human body, and so at 14 I thought, you know what, I'd love to be a doctor.
Okay, so you made up your mind and maybe shifted your singular focus from swimming to that goal. And when you began to study medicine, how did it meet with your expectations?
Well, in terms of university life, so I was a bit shocked at first when I came to uni because it was so much less structured than school had been. So actually, we had an event earlier today where I actually told a story that unfortunately the start of my university career wasn't quite as sparkly as you might imagine. I just had a schoolgirl brain and I brought that schoolgirl thinking to university, and so actually I really messed up and I actually failed my first exam.
Really?
At Melbourne University. Yeah, do we have to stop now? Do I like get do I get thrown out at this point? But I did, and I'm very ashamed. You know, I'd never failed anything in my life, so also I didn't cope with it very well. But it was because I had no idea what I was doing. So I promptly got myself a tutor for that subject, and the tutor pointed out a rather major mistake that I'd been making, and I ended up doing very well in the end of year exam, and I got an H1 overall. But I did learn, it really taught me that failure happens to everybody. Maybe not an exam, but somewhere in life you will really mess up.
Sure.
And it just doesn't matter. You just need to brush it off and get on with it. So actually it was quite a good learning experience for me.
Yeah.
But other than that, uni was pretty smooth. Okay. But it was a tough shock at the start.
A shock at the beginning, yeah. And what about oncology? When did you, orient yourself towards that?
Not for ages.
Right.
So I was planning to be a sports doctor.
Oh.
So going back, I was actually planning to be an Olympic swimmer. That didn't work out so well. So I got a very bad shoulder injury and I retired at 17. And so my swimming career was over. And that was hugely disappointing to me because I really thought, you know, the one thing that I was good at was taken away from me, and I was 17 years old. But then I did year 12, got into med, and all throughout medical school I thought I'd be a sports doctor because I was so interested in sport, and I had lots of friends who'd gone on to be involved in very high level sport at the Olympics or Commonwealth Games or in coaching or whatever.
A bit of envy looking on.
What's that?
A bit of envy looking on perhaps.
Oh yeah, and I still just loved sport. So I actually spent a lot of time as soon as I graduated, I spent a lot of time as a junior doctor actually working as a team doctor with the Australian swimming team. Wow. And I thought that was going to be my career. That was the plan. So I was very lucky. I travelled with junior Australian swimming teams, first of all, and then senior teams. Probably one of the greatest moments in my life, I was asked to be the team doctor for the Melbourne Commonwealth Games in 2006, and I'm a Melbourne person and I love this city, and so getting to march into the opening ceremony at the MCG that night of the, you know, of the...
Oh, you get to
start
march
of
in
the
with the
Commonwealth Games.
team.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
When you're part of the team, the Australian swimming team, you're part of the Australian swimming team.
Yeah,
exactly.
Of course.
You get the whole fancy uniform, you get everything. It's great. And so I sort of had dreamed of doing that. But then it all changed because I was randomly asked to work for 3 months on the lung cancer ward at Peter MacCallum Cancer Institute. That was just what my roster said. And if truth be known, I actually tried to swap out of it.
All right.
And I actually tried really hard because I rang a whole stack of people and I was like, you know, could you please change? Like, I don't really want to do this. It's not so interesting. And this person said, oh, look, I can't. I'm going to a wedding then. It's like, okay, could you please change? And it's like, no, it doesn't quite suit. It's like, no, could you? And I went through all these people and finally I was like, okay, just, all right, I'll do it. So I did this 3-month term and I was 25 years old at the time, and I really was the classic, you know, brand new shiny doctor, planning to save the world, do good things. And I rocked up on the ward, and all of my patients had lung cancer, obviously. Lung cancer is a terrible disease, and most of my patients were smokers or ex-smokers, and nearly all of them had started smoking when they were children. Right. And despite living in a country with amazing medicine, I mean, thanks to a university like this and amazing technologies, nearly every single one of my patients died. And it was just incredible. You know, I was a person ringing people in the middle of the night saying, look, I'm terribly sorry, but you need to come in really quickly because, your dad's just taken a terrible turn for the worse and I'm really sorry, but you need to hurry and come and say goodbye. And sometimes I was ringing teenagers to tell them to come and say goodbye to their parents. And so it had a really big impact on me.
Sounds like it, yeah.
And I've never sort of really forgotten that term. And that term, I worked with Professor David Ball, who is just one of the most inspirational lung cancer doctors in the world, and we have him right here in Melbourne. And he was just one of those people I couldn't help but be inspired by. And so after that, I just kept thinking, well, that was a good job. That's a really interesting job, and I want to be like Professor Ball. And I just couldn't get that out of my head. And so actually, I wouldn't have done oncology if it wasn't for him.
So that singular focus kicked in again, and then you had seen your share of human misery by the sounds of things by the time the year 2010 rolled around. And you were working as a radiation oncologist at this point.
That's
correct?
right, exactly.
And then I want to talk about a meeting that you had that year that had nothing whatsoever to do with medicine. It was a meeting about your super. Tell us what happened.
That's it. Well, so that's it. I was working as a specialist cancer doctor by then, and 1/3 of all cancers are caused by tobacco. So tobacco kind of lurks in the shadows all throughout the life of an oncologist. And actually my husband and I were buying a house. And we sat down with the accountant, and the accountant said, look, you two need to sort out your money. How much money do you have in super? And I just went, well, I've got no idea. Like, I don't even really know what super is. That was about it. I'd heard of it.
Yeah,
that was it.
That's a start.
Yeah, thank you, and that's it. And but that's how unsophisticated I was when it came to finance. But I'm a very obedient person, and so the accountant says, sort it out. So I was like, all right, I will. So I organised a meeting with the representative from the super fund for all of the employees at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. And we had this meeting at the cafeteria at the hospital, and he brought along some paperwork and he showed me how much money I had, and, we had a nice little chat, and I remember I had a latte, and it was all very pleasant. I shook his hand, the meeting finished. And completely as an afterthought, I rushed back to the table and I said, oh, by the way, was I meant to tell you what to do with that money? And he said, no, you don't need to worry. It's all taken care of. You're in the default option. And I said, oh, option, does that mean there are other options? And he looked at me and he rolled his eyes and he just went, look, there is this one greenie option for people who have a problem with investing in mining, alcohol or tobacco. And I said, did you just say tobacco? And he said, yes. And I said, so you're telling me I'm currently investing in tobacco? And he said, oh yes, everyone is. And that was it. That was just this incredible moment, because I suddenly realised, I'd been going to work every day for more than 10 years trying to help people who were suffering as a result of tobacco and not helping them very well. People are very nice to doctors and oncologists and thank us for everything, but the truth is tobacco-related illness is awful and most people don't survive. So I knew that firsthand, and yet at the very same time I found out my money is being invested in the companies that make the products that are killing my own patients.
How angry were you?
You know what, actually angry isn't the right word for me. I'm not an angry person.
You do have you get like this fire when you talk about that. You're like, you're annoyed, maybe is what, I don't know if angry is a word. Maybe you describe the feeling.
Totally undermined. It made me feel like my whole life was pointless. Really, what's the point of going to work every day, watching people die from tobacco, when in fact your own money is fueling that industry?
Sure.
And I just thought, what on earth am I doing? I've studied all this time to try to help people. I know that what we're doing is really tough. I know the health sector is doing everything it can, and yet at the same time we're all working against each other. It just felt like something that I couldn't walk past, and I couldn't sleep after that. It just got to me.
So what was the next step that you took?
Well, actually, every Friday, all of the radiation oncologists at Peter MacCallum got together to discuss an interesting patient, and my turn was coming up a few weeks later. And so instead of discussing an interesting patient, I presented this, and I told everyone in the room I presented. And by then I'd contacted that the super fund representative, because I said to him, could you just tell me which shares I have? What have I got then? Tell me. And he rang me back, and I actually still have the piece of paper because where I wrote it down, he paged me. I was working at the hospital, and I can still remember there. And he said, look, you've got tobacco in the international shares part of your portfolio, which was a very big part, and it is a big part of everybody's portfolio. So it's about 50% of all your money in super will be in international shares. And he said, your number one holding is British American tobacco. Your number two holding is Imperial Tobacco. Your number four holding is Philip Morris. And your number five holding is a Swedish match company. So 4 of the top 5 companies that I was investing in were tobacco companies.
And when you looked into it, did you find that that was an aberration, or was it relatively standard?
So I found out pretty quickly that pretty much every super fund in Australia had money invested in tobacco companies. And then I found out actually it wasn't just super funds, it was banks, insurance agencies, sovereign wealth funds, fund managers. And then I found out it wasn't actually Australia, it was the entire world. So the whole global finance sector is completely tangled up in the tobacco industry, and it's a great big mess. But I'm glad I didn't understand that right at the start, because I think that would have frightened me. Yes. So it was actually quite good that I didn't know what I was doing at the start.
There's a question about that later. So you had that idea and you went along to the meeting and you started talking about it and developing this idea. How quickly did things scale up from there, and what did it become?
I was pretty slow at the start.
Okay.
So I discussed it amongst the team, the radiation oncologist. The head radiation oncologist said, look, you really need to tell the CEO of the hospital. So I did. And 24 hours later, he rang back and he said, I'd like you to present to the CEO and the investment team of this super fund. And that was scheduled for a few months later. I did that, and that kicked off the conversation. Now, in 2010, the concept of transparency around finance, responsible finance, sustainable finance, all of those concepts were very, very new. So the conversation that I wanted to have with people was really tough. And even though I got a few meetings, people were largely humouring me by taking the meetings. And so not much happened for a while, but eventually I was asked to present to the board of my own super fund, which was the super fund for a lot of the people at Peter Mac. And the meeting went well. I had the CEO of the hospital here. I had Professor David Ball from the lung cancer ward. I asked him to come with me, and he did. He sat there. And the meeting went well, and there was still more considerations for the super fund to go through, but in the end, in the middle of 2012, they decided to go tobacco-free. We had a joint press release with the hospital, so it was a good news story. Everybody felt great. They felt great, we felt great, the community felt great. They got incredible feedback, and they got rid of $200 million worth of tobacco that day, and that was the start of tobacco-free portfolios.
Right, so it's significantly bigger than that now. I guess what I want to know is how you take it from that one win in 2012 to something that is much broader.
Yeah.
What was the next step?
Well, I was so overwhelmed that day of that announcement, and I guess a couple of things happened that day. One was that Professor Ball sent me an email. And he wrote down and he said, congratulations on this big change. And he said, with this action, you will save more lives than in an entire lifetime as a clinician. Keep up the good work. Now that was big, because for me, it meant that someone who I really respected was backing me. And so I did get a lot of criticism over the years, and I still do. People say to me, did you seriously study for 15 years to be a radiation oncologist, and now you fly all around the world and have meetings with CEOs of banks? Like, is that what you did that for? But I can just brush it off. That sentence for me has been like a shield in my life that just flicks away any criticism, because I just secretly think to myself, well, look, if Professor Ball thinks it's a good idea, it probably is. And so I don't really care what anybody else thinks. But the second thing that happened that day was that I reached out to the CEO of that super fund, and I wrote to him and I said, thank you. I said, this is just amazing. This is really great. I want to thank you for this decision. It's overwhelmingly the right thing to do. It really resonates with us at the hospital. We feel great to belong to a super fund that has drawn a line in the sand and said, look, this is what we stand for and what we don't stand for. And so I wrote to him and then I said, look, I'd love to catch up with you and see if we could have a bit of a chat. And so that meeting took place a while later because I was having babies at the time. But after I came back from maternity leave, we met. And it was one of those meetings that was scheduled for about 20 minutes that went for an hour and a half.
Great.
You always know those are good. If the meeting's going a long time, you know everything's going well.
Yeah.
And in that meeting, he could see that it was an idea worth championing, and I could see that he wanted to help me. And so in the end, his name is Michael Dwyer. He's stepped down now as the CEO of First State Super, but he took me under his wing and put me on stage, and sometimes stood on stage beside me at finance organisations while I was learning the language of finance and how to speak finance, how to understand the regulatory environment and how it would all work. But he also opened his little black book and very kindly introduced me straight at the very highest level across the Australian superannuation sector, and one by one, it was just the network expanded, and so now there are 45 Australian super funds that are tobacco free, and they control about $1.5 trillion of Australians' money, and that wouldn't have happened without him being that sort of supporter and champion right from the start.
Okay, so many questions, but I guess the first one, I was really interested in the pitch that you ended up developing when you were speaking to these finance leaders, because, and you must have honed it over time, but it's not easy to stand up, particularly, as you say, using language that it's a whole other set of language, it's a whole other realm. Not only have you had to bridge that gap, but you then have to do the hard work of convincing them. And you developed this pop-up ethical framework, which I just think is brilliant. Can you tell us what questions you asked those people to apply to their investment decisions?
You're right, it took years and years to develop that. So I call it my presentation for the finance sector, and I think I've probably refined it close to 1,000 times now in the past 10 years. And every time I gave it, and I've given it, I'm super sensitive to how people interpret it, and I try to imagine what it's like sitting in their shoes listening to me, and I watch them very carefully and look at them, and if something doesn't resonate, I think, right, get rid of that next time, and if something does, it's like, good, that slide's staying in, good, and every time something new happens, I'll put it in and switch it out and refine and tweak, and so I'm working on that presentation every single day. It changes every single presentation I give. But what ended up being extremely helpful was creating a framework to help finance leaders justify why it is reasonable to take such a strong position on the tobacco industry. And so I just suggest they ask 3 questions. And question 1 is, and this is a system that you can use when you're thinking about investing in any company. Just ask 3 questions of any company. Question 1, does the company make a product that can be used safely? And the answer for tobacco is no. So 0 is the only safe amount of tobacco for a human being. It's crystal clear, it's black and white. Question 2 is, does the company cause a problem so significant globally that it's subject to a UN treaty or a global convention? And the answer for tobacco is yes. And this is extremely unique. There's only one global health treaty that exists, and perhaps someone else in this room can invent the 2nd, 3rd and 4th ones. But at the moment, there's only one that exists, and it's the UN Tobacco Control Treaty. And that's been set up because the World Health Organization predicts that the world will see 1 billion tobacco deaths this century. Just think about that for a sec. There's only 7 billion of us. We're on track for 1 billion tobacco deaths this century. And so is there a UN treaty or a global convention? Yes. And then the third question is, the buzzword in the finance sector at the moment is engagement. So the finance sector says, look, we know all these issues are tricky with certain companies. We're going to sit down and engage with those companies, have a nice chat, have a dialogue, and see if we can shift those companies into doing better things. And engagement is effective in a whole raft of cases, and it does push companies to do better things. There are many examples. But the question is, does engagement work? Is that an effective strategy for this issue? And the thing with tobacco is no. Engagement with the tobacco industry is futile because the only acceptable outcome is that they shut down.
Because people have tried.
Their primary business. So this is it. And so it's also, this is not just me saying engagement doesn't work with tobacco companies. In fact, the UN has a non-engagement policy with the tobacco industry, which is also extraordinary to have an actual policy like that. So that's our little framework. We spend a lot of time discussing the ins and outs of that, as you can imagine. Yeah. And you know, there are many, many other controversial or difficult or unethical or questionable industries or companies out there. And so we do end up discussing all of those as well, or at least touching on them and talking about how they might fit in that framework or how they don't fit in that framework. But for us, it's been a very helpful way to shape the conversation.
I want to talk about the conversations that you had that didn't go how you planned. Because I can imagine that there would have been times that you walked into those rooms and you were met with a brick wall. Tell me how those conversations went and I guess how you respond to that.
There's lots of those. So what I've done over the years is I've sort of invented this little system that I use. And I don't know why, but I always imagine a protractor. I'm such a nerd, right? So we just have to get over that. But you know a protractor with the 180 degrees? Like I always imagine this protractor. So when I'm going in to meet someone from the finance sector, I'm trying to work out where do they fit between here, where they absolutely hate what I do. They're not interested at all. In fact, I probably wouldn't get a meeting with them. I'm only seeing them because I'm bumping into them at a conference or something. So they're over here. Or, okay, they'll tolerate me if they have to. We're sort of warming up, we're getting a bit better. Then here they're interested. Here they're like, actually, we could probably do this. Over here they're implementing the new policy. Here they're standing on stage announcing it. And over here they've just introduced me to their best friend who's the CEO of another big bank. Where are they on that scale? And when I go and sit down in a meeting, I very strategically work out where they are in the first probably 5 minutes. And then I just try to sort of speak about 5 to 10 degrees in front of that. There has to be some magic tension between us so I can pull them along this way. And if they're here and I'm here, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. If they're really, really resistant, all I try to do, so for the really difficult ones, all I try to do is move them off 0. Let's even get them to 1 degree and I secure a second conversation, a second meeting. That's all I try to do. And the reason why I don't get worried or don't get upset about that anymore is because I have seen hundreds of people go from 0 all the way over here to people who are now championing us, joining our advisory council, coming to the United Nations with us, doing all sorts of things. And so it's almost become like a game for me because when I meet someone here, I think, how long is it going to be until I get one here? So I'm very optimistic.
When I heard about what you were doing, I couldn't help but think of the divestment movement around fossil fuels, which has been incredibly well publicised. Were there lessons from those kinds of campaigns for you in your work, or do you see them as totally separate?
Oh no, they're definitely linked. I mean, I think it's actually far broader than fossil fuels and climate. So going back to sort of that framework. So initially, I just used to talk about tobacco. This is back in 2010, but pretty quickly I learnt that I had to have a good knowledge base around a whole range of difficult sectors, and that includes alcohol, sugar, controversial weapons, war, gender diversity, palm oil, ocean plastic, gambling, pornography, fossil fuels, climate change, human rights. You can just go on and on. And one time I was actually sitting in the States about a year ago, and I was having one of those 0 conversations with someone in the finance sector who really didn't want to talk to me. And she said to me, she got a bit angry. She said, are you just sitting there saying tobacco is the most important thing in the world because tomorrow someone's going to sit there saying guns are the most important thing? Anyway, at the time I was a bit shocked because she really was quite angry. And of course I have a long time to think about this on the plane on the way home, and then I think up my really good answer, of course, not at the time. Anyway, what I did though was actually added a new slide to my presentation, and it's a new slide with little logos to represent all those things I just said. So a sugar logo, plastic logo, all of these little logos. because I think it's absurd to have a competition about what's the most evil thing in the world, because they're actually all important issues. The whole lot of them are important. But what we need to do is link the issue with the appropriate tool for change that the finance sector has at its disposal. And there are a few different tools, and this is probably getting a bit technical, but there are more things that you can do than just invest or not invest. There are a few other levers that you might pull. So one of them I mentioned was engagement. This is the buzzword. Sometimes engagement is effective. Sometimes there's this other thing called best of sector investing, where you might only invest in the best of a certain kind of company and you don't invest in the rest. There's also impact investing, where, so for example, in climate, a lot of people are putting a lot of money into hydro and solar and clean technologies. So when it comes to climate, it's actually far more complicated than tobacco. I always tell people tobacco is the easy one. It's really easy because you're either in or you're out. There is no nuance there. But with climate, you can probably pull all of those levers. For some companies, you might get rid of them altogether. For some companies, you might sit down and say, look, we still need what you're doing, but we need to do it in a much cleaner way. We should absolutely look at impact investing and get really, really pushing up solar, hydro, all sorts of other wind technologies. And we should use all of those strategies to do whatever we can to really pivot to make sure that, the worst climate predictions don't come true.
And those are the difficult conversations that you had with the finance sector. But I can't help but wonder, because you've funneled, I read more than $1 trillion away from tobacco companies. Maybe the count's higher than that now.
So globally?
Yeah.
It's now, in Aussie dollars,
yeah.
It's 12.5 trillion.
12.5 trillion. Okay, so that's about 6 times the annual US defence budget. Like, that's a staggering amount of money the mind boggles, right? Like, you can't even picture that.
It's a lot of zeros.
It's a lot of zeros.
Let me tell you that.
It's so many zeros. So I guess I wanted to talk about, we probably don't have time to talk about all of them individually, but where the kind of divide is there, like are there countries that you just found to be wholly impenetrable and not up for this conversation at all? And by contrast, where are the places that have swung open the door?
They're wildly different. And so every time, part of that protractor little system I was talking about, it very much does depend on which country I'm in, because certain countries do seem to have certain bandwidths that I can almost put them in before I've met the person. So with a name like Lavoie-Pierre, you'll be very happy to hear that one country that sits right at the forefront of sustainability thinking is France.
Right.
And I can't tell you how happy I am that our conversations have gone unbelievably well in France. And people find that shocking because they say, but the French, they love to smoke. This doesn't make sense. But actually, it's totally the opposite. So the French finance sector, outside of Australia, our work has been more successful in France than anywhere else, and the French finance sector has championed this and pushed this and made this far bigger than I ever could have imagined. So France, Scandinavia, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, very, very advanced thinking around this. The 2 countries that have been the toughest for us are the USA and the UK, and that's because the tobacco industry is really very ingrained in both of those countries.
So you were talking earlier about, I guess, how you'd imagined your career at the very beginning, and it's fair to say that it's well off course, but in the best possible way.
It's totally off course. Goodness me, it's totally off course. But it's funny. My first colleague in tobacco-free portfolios, Claire Payne, she's a great thought leader in ethics and finance. And in fact, she teaches here at University of Melbourne. She and I, worked together closely for years, and it was just as we'd started to take our first global steps. And I said to her, "Look, I don't quite know where I'm going." And she said, "Just keep stepping forwards. The path is forming under your feet." And I thought, that is the best quote, because it just summed it up for me. Because I was stepping forwards. It felt like I was going in the right direction, and it was progress, and it was good, and it was positive. But I honestly didn't know where I was going. But I love this idea of, don't worry, the path is coming. It's just right under you. Just keep going. And So it really conveyed this sense of sort of scary apprehension, but at the same time, security. It's going to be fine.
Do you ever see yourself winding back to a path that more closely resembles the one you first imagined?
I think that's very unlikely.
Okay, right. Interesting.
Yeah, I've got myself in way too deep now. Yeah.
So, well, in that case, I mean, what's the kind of, how do you, I mean, it feels like you've scaled up almost as far as one can scale this up.
Oh no, I'm just getting warmed up.
Well, where does it go from here?
Well, maybe I could just tell you about the big thing, our big flagship initiative is called the Pledge.
Okay.
I just want to tell you about that so that I can then explain sort of where we're going. But so our work was going well in Australia. We then had this impact in France. The biggest French insurer goes tobacco-free. They got rid of $2.8 billion worth of tobacco. The biggest pension plan in Europe goes tobacco-free. Then the biggest bank in Europe stops lending, investing, insuring tobacco companies. Their CEO joins my advisory council. Everything's going very well.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. And Claire and I started to get invited to events on the global circuit, including at the UN. And so Claire and I went to the UN during the UN General Assembly in September 2017. And we're invited to all these events on sustainable finance and all sorts of interesting things. And just after that, that's when the big bank, BNP Paribas, the big French bank, went tobacco-free. And I remember ringing Claire and I said, look, everything's going so well. Why don't we have an event at the UN? Everybody else seems to be. So
it's just the done thing.
It's the done thing. So why don't we? And so it was just before Christmas 2017. I emailed 3 heads of 3 UN agencies and I said to them, would you partner with us if we had an event at the UN? And I honestly thought there was about a 1% chance that one of them might say yes. But within 48 hours, all 3 of them emailed back and said yes, yes, yes. And I thought, okay, all right. So I emailed all of these business leaders who we'd worked with around the world and I said, if we had an event at the UN, would you come? They all said yes. And I was like, okay. So it gets to January of 2018. The UN General Assembly is September, so we've got like 8 or 9 months to play with. And we had our first phone call to organise this event. And we gave it a name. We're going to call it the Pledge, the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge. And we're going to try to get finance organisations to sign up to pledge that they're going to do this. And we're having this phone call. It's a conference call. Everyone's all around the world. And I was just saying, this is going to be amazing. We have this great event. It'll be fantastic. And the heads of one of the UN agencies, he interrupts and he says, oh, Bronwyn, you do realise if you're going to have an event at the UN that you need a Prime Minister and a President to sign off for you?
You went, yeah, I knew that, yeah.
And I went, yeah, just leave that with me. Yeah, no worries. So our second call, let's schedule that one. So it was like, okay. And then he said, one of them really should be from the G7. I was like, okay,
sure, no problem.
Exactly. Speak to you next month. Great. So I got off the phone, but then I ring my friends in the French finance sector. And I said to them, could you help me here? Because we've got to randomly get a president and a prime minister, you know, just a little issue. And about a week later, the CEO of the biggest bank in Europe wrote me an email with an attachment, and it was a letter. And he said, what do you think of this? And the letter was addressed directly to President Macron, and it was the most beautiful letter you can imagine. And he had signed it, the CEO of BNP Paribas, and he got 3 other CEOs from the other 3 biggest French financial organisations. They wrote directly to Macron and they said, look, we've been working with Dr. King and her team, we've gone tobacco-free, we feel very proud to be involved, and we would like you to seriously consider signing off for this event. Anyway, President Macron's team said, yes, they'll meet with me. So a month later, there I was at the Elysée in Paris meeting President Macron's advisor. He says, President Macron's into sustainable finance, he'll love this. Go home, sort this out with your Prime Minister and we're in. Okay, great. And then they said, yeah, Macron's coming to Australia on the 1st of May. This is 2018.
Right.
And he'll discuss it. He'll bring it up with Prime Minister Turnbull then.
Mm-hmm.
On the way home, I dropped in at the big anti-tobacco conference that was on in South Africa. I then meet with the head of the UN Tobacco Control Treaty and I tell her about it. And I said, if we had this event, will you come? She's in. I then meet with the head of the World Health Organization. And he listened very carefully to my story and then he said to me, that is the missing piece of global tobacco control. I'm coming. Great. So then I go home, and then to cut a very long story short, it was 2 months of torture because I went to Canberra, visited Canberra, kind of wrote to Canberra, visited, went, wrote, and everybody said they would sign off when somebody else signed off, but somebody had to go first. And so it was kind of excruciating, to the point where the day before President Macron was coming, no one had briefed the Prime Minister. And so I was kind of dying. Anyway, I emailed the guy that I had met from President Macron's team, and I said to him, look, hope all is well for your trip to Australia. Look, if you happen to have any free time, please let me know. It'd be very nice to catch up. And his secretary wrote straight back. He didn't get the email. His secretary wrote back and said, look, he's actually not coming, but he wishes you well. And President Macron looks forward to raising the issue with your Prime Minister tomorrow. I was like, oh my gosh. It was like, wow, I'm going to create this international diplomatic disaster. Anyway, but the guy I met then answered. He actually checked his email and he wrote back and he said, yes, we've briefed this person, this person, this person. It's on the official agenda for conversation, and we're so happy it's going to go well. And anyway, 1st of May rolls around, President Macron's in the air. It was the most torturous moment, and I just thought, wow, I can't believe I've totally stuffed this up. It's going to be excruciating. And so that morning, I thought, I'm just going to give one more shot. And I rang everyone I knew in Canberra, everyone, and basically begged them. And about an hour later, the Health Minister's office rang back and they said, don't worry, it's all fine. It's all fine. You're going to hear from the Prime Minister's office soon. An hour later, the Prime Minister's office rings and said, it's all right, we've got it. We're going to brief the Prime Minister. It's all fine. Thank you, it's fine. And I'm like, oh, thank you so much. And then they said, you are coming to dinner tonight, aren't you? And I said, well, look, I haven't got an invitation. So, and they go, the dinner at the Opera House. I said, well, I could come to dinner at the Opera House. And I said, yes, yeah, that would, and she said, look, let me just check. I'll sort out an invitation for you. I'm from Melbourne, And anyway, I immediately put down the phone, picked up the phone, and rang my assistant. I said, "Look, book me a ticket right now." And so she books me a ticket to Sydney. I go to the airport. I get to Sydney. The invitation lands in my inbox. I get to the Opera House, and an hour later, I meet President Macron. He signed off on our event. The Prime Minister at the time, Mr Turnbull, signed off on our event, and we were able to launch the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge at the UN in September 2018. It was excruciating. There's now 129 signatories, and together they account for some of the world's biggest financial organisations in the world. They control 12.5 trillion Aussie dollars, and this year we're having a big celebration of the 2-year anniversary, hoping to get as many more recruits as we can. Just to give context, that's about 10% of the global, the amount of finance in the world. So there's lots of debates as to how much money is swirling around the world, but that's about 10%. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's just a nice start, but we really want to celebrate that progress and encourage others to follow suit.
Yes, absolutely. Now, as promised, I didn't get through all my questions, but it's time for other people to have a go. So we're going to offer the opportunity to ask Bronwyn some questions if you have any. Kristen and Alicia, I think, have microphones. And maybe while you're thinking of your first one, I suppose I did have another question. I suppose a relevant one, given the audience here today. Is for anyone here who's a recent graduate or a student who's kind of trying to imagine, and it's so hard to imagine at the best of times, how their career might play out. What advice would you give to those people?
I think the most important thing is to be open to opportunities. Obviously, my life has taken me on a very unorthodox, unexpected path, and so I've really tried to just be open to what the universe has planned for me. So I'd encourage that. Try not to be too rigid to what you have in mind, especially because the world's changing so quickly, and we know that there are going to be jobs in your lifetimes that don't even exist today. that don't even have names today. So in a way, it would sort of be a shame to be really set when the world's going to open up opportunities, and will continue to do that all throughout your lives. But I think the other thing is to really play to your strengths, acknowledge what you're good at and acknowledge what you're not good at. And one thing for me, much to this disappointment of perhaps some of the front row people in this room, is that I'm actually not good at research. I wish I was, but I'm not. And it's possibly taken years of therapy for me to say that, but I am not good at research. I'm not. And it was really tough because I was working at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, where really researchers are the ones who are glorified. Everyone wants to be a great researcher. And the problem is it's just not my thing. It's just not my thing. I know the world needs great researchers, but it's not going to be me. And so finally, after I found this work, I could just call it and say, you know what, I'm really not good at that, but I just love this. It feels like I'm in the right place. And so I'd encourage people to try to find something that doesn't entirely feel like work. For me, this is a great pleasure, it's a passion, it's energising. And so try to find something that really fits your skill set, fits what you love, and something that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning.
Does anyone have any questions?
So despite your wonderful efforts, there's still a lot of investment in unethical companies and tobacco. Do you have advice for people who want to try and get out of that in their personal investments?
Well, hopefully we'll be able to help you solve that problem very soon. So this week we've just launched, for the finance sector only, publicly it's going to come later, but we've launched this new thing called the Stamp of Approval, and it's for, if super funds would like to, they can sign up. They will be assessed against criteria that we have set to craft what is tobacco free. And if they meet that criteria, they can then adopt this stamp so that you can easily look up a website or in a brochure and see and be sure that your money is not invested in tobacco. Because at the moment, you probably can find it. Sometimes you can't find it at all. But if you can find it, it's hidden in a ridiculous product disclosure statement that's 30 pages long that nobody can understand. And it shouldn't be that hard to find out that your money is not invested in big tobacco. When we consider sustainable finance or ethical finance or responsible finance more broadly, we really think of tobacco as just the first step. But it's a very good marker, because if a super fund cannot deal with the issue of tobacco, which it really is, I mean, broadly and widely regarded as the easy one, if they can't get their heads around tobacco, I mean, I really don't know how they can possibly get their heads around climate change or any of these far more complicated, nuanced issues that require a whole lot of action, probably forever. Tobacco, you're in or you're out, that's it. So hopefully, that will help people realise where their money is. And I really just encourage people to remember that superannuation is your money. It's yours. It doesn't belong to the superannuation company. It's entirely your money, and you have the right to know where it's invested. And you need to make sure that it is aligned and, with your values, the way that you think, the way that you want the world to be. And, there's some great quotes about, you need to make sure that, I've forgotten the exact quote, hang on, it's just coming to me now. But it's something like, money shapes the world that we want. Make sure that your money is shaping the world that you want. Because ultimately that's it. Money makes things happen, or it makes things not happen. It's unbelievably powerful. And collectively, Australians have the 4th biggest superannuation industry in the world. So we often don't realise that. I certainly didn't know that. USA is number 1, and it's enormous. Then the UK, and then Japan and Australia are often sort of jockeying for numbers 3 and 4. But we're massive in terms of our collective power. So, I think that I'd really encourage people to be aware of that power, raise their voices, and make things change.
First of all, thank you so much. So when you took your work globally, what kind of, tobacco-free campaigns or charities did you collaborate with? And if so, in what kind of capacity?
Well, actually, there are no tobacco campaigns or charities that do what we do. We're the only ones in the whole world. That's it. And so we try to bridge the world of health and finance. We try to build this bridge. And no one else is doing that. there are many anti-tobacco charities out there. They're really focused on, going to schools, encouraging children to quit, implementing tobacco policy at government level, so encouraging, say, no advertising of tobacco in sport, or no smoking on planes, no smoking in restaurants, plain packaging legislation, all of that kind of stuff, increasing taxes. But no one does what we do. We're the only ones. So it really was a gap. And so that's why when I met the head of the World Health Organization, that's why he said, that's the missing piece, because no one else was doing it.
Please thank Dr. Bronwyn King.
Thank you.
I told you it would be very inspiring. I think the words that come to mind is crusader and certainly trailblazer. So it's just one thing about medicine and biomedical research. You probably think, we save lives through our knowledge in medicine or through our discoveries of new treatments and new ways of curing very, devastating disease. But what this story told you tonight is global advocacy and passion and determination can save as many lives, if not more. So thank you very much, Bronwyn. It was very, very inspiring. And a bit of a proud moment for myself because I hold two passports, a French one and an Australian one. And I was very pleased to see that the two came together to help that very worthy cause for the world. So I think it's a particularly proud moment for me. Thank you. So I have a little present for you, Bronwyn. Thank you for your time and sharing this wonderful story.
Oops. Thank you. Thank you so much.
For all our students and alumni, I'm sure, like me, you really enjoy this because it's really a treat for tonight. So let me thank also Angela for really hosting and helping the conversation tonight. Thank you very much for doing that. And please join me in thanking our two wonderful